What's up, it's Kaero. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing Phyrexia All Will Be One spoilers. There are about 17 cards that have been revealed so far, some of them officially, some of them not. We're going to go through every one of them today, and I'm going to talk about their rankings that I feel their power levels are in Standard. If you like the video, you get something from it, please hit that thumbs up for me. It's free, it helps the channel, and consider subscribing for more Magic content. Here we go. Right out of the gate, we have Koth, Fire of Resistance. 2 red mana, 2 generic, 4 loyalty planeswalker, +2, search your library for a basic mountain, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. -3, he deals damage to target creature equal to the number of mountains you control, and -7, you get an emblem. Whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, this emblem deals 4 damage to any target. This seems slow to me. I'm not a fan of Koth. Costs 4 mana. If he's going in your mono red deck because he cares about having basic mountains, he can't grab triomes. He can't grab dual lands. So if you're playing him in your mono red deck, you play him on turn 4, +2, grab a mountain. That doesn't do anything for you. I think optimally what you want is you play him on turn 4, you -3, kill a thing. Next turn you +1, grab a mountain. And then you -3 again, kill another thing. His ultimate is pretty good, but I don't like the fact that it only triggers when you play mountains. Whenever we want emblems, we want things that independently do things every single turn. In Koth, I don't think that power level is up to snuff in Standard right now. Next up, we have Slowbad, Iron Goblin, 3 mana, 3/3 legendary creature, Goblin Artificer, is also Phyrexian. You can tap Slowbad to sack an artifact, add an amount of red mana equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value, spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. So, as you can see, Slowbad's pretty narrow. He cares only about artifacts with his ability. So the thing here, I think, is Rakdos Unearth, where we have a lot of artifacts where we sack them, they go to the graveyard, we can unearth them to bring them back later. You can play a turn 4 artifact with Unearth, swing with it, sack them with Slowbad, go to the graveyard, add some mana, maybe have 8 mana, play a Cityscape Leveler, then you have a good, big, nasty artifact on the field, and you can still bring back your Unearth artifacts. So I think Slowbad doesn't go in every deck, but Slowbad could be good in a probably black-red artifact Unearth deck. Next, we have the bomb of the spoilers so far. Phyrexian Obliterator sees a reprint, 4 black, 5/5 trample. So good on offense, good on defense. Phyrexian Horror. Whenever a source deals damage to Phyrexian Obliterator, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents. If they don't have that many permanents out, that includes lands as well. Phyrexian Obliterator has always been good in mono black builds. I think the cream of the crop here, and something that I want to do in Standard, is try to maximize a little bit of treasure generation within mono black and then maybe do a fight spell. Because if you fight Phyrexian Obliterator with one of their creatures, say it's like a 4/4, kills that creature, makes them sacrifice 4 permanents, that's going to be some fun jank. But ultimately, this is a mono black card. This is a very good mono black card. This has the ability to shut down aggro decks and make a board of 3 or 4 creatures against you. Really think about if they want to attack you, especially with a 4/4, 5/5, or even if they have like a huge thing. It's like, well, you hit me for 7, I'm going to block with the Obliterator dies, but then you're going to sacrifice 7 permanents. So the thing when you're playing Phyrexian Obliterator to watch out for is if your opponent has a lot of exile removal, destroy target creature, but when it's damaged, it's super good. It's going to be good in the Standard meta. Next up, Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines. And as you can see, Elesh Norn is kind of behind me, so I can't say anything too bad about her. Maybe she should kind of like hit me. 1 white, 4 generic, 4/7 Vigilance, legendary creature Phyrexian Praetor. So this completes the Praetor cycle that we've seen over the last few years. It has Vigilance. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to your permanents of your opponent's control to trigger. Blah. Wow, that's a lot of text. Okay, so Elesh Norn, there's been a lot of hype about her. I think she is a good card. I did a separate video on her, but I don't think she's as good as everybody thinks. 5 mana for a 4/7 Vigilance, and then you really want your permanents to be triggering multiple times whenever they enter the battlefield. The problem is in the Standard meta right now, we have a lot of things that enter the battlefield and trigger or care about things entering the battlefield. Those are generally in the 2, 3, 4, and 5 drop slots. We don't have anything really massive that can come down after Elesh Norn is down to really seal the deal for control decks. Elesh Norn is a good card. I think Elesh Norn will be getting way better as we get more sets added to Standard. But right now, I think it's a solid build-around card. Might be a deck here or there, but I don't think it's going to be a format staple like Sheoldred was. Next up, we have Blue Sun's Twilight. Double blue and X sorcery. Gain control of target creature with mana value X or less. If X is 5 or more, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Okay, a lot to unpack here, actually. If we think of the standard meta, we think of a lot of good aggro decks right now, a lot of good mid-range. We don't have a lot of good control decks at the moment. So really, to get the payoff for this, you want to be casting this for 7 mana. So if there's a control shell that really wants to take advantage of gaining control of creatures and creating copies of that, this could see play in there. But I think ultimately this is a dead card if you're trying to get control of a 2-drop. You're paying 4 to do that, and ultimately you're just going to get run over. This is a dead card if you're playing against creatureless control decks because there's no target, basically, for you to do your big finisher on this. This is also a dead card if you're playing against any deck that has the ability to sacrifice their creature. Or say you cast this, you're like, yeah, I'm going to take that big creature and make a token of it. I'm going to turn this game around. And then they just kind of go for the throat their own creature or whatever, and then just nullify this card. So this card is very brittle. It has, obviously, the ability to be very, very powerful. I don't think this is going to be a standard staple, but it is going to be a fun card, and I'm going to definitely try it on day 1 of release. But yeah, I'm kind of lukewarm on Blue Sun's Twilight. Next up is Urabrask's Anointer. This is 1 red 3 generic for a Phyrexian wizard artifact creature, 4 power, 2 toughness. When it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. So this is a new mechanic for all will be 1. The oil counters matter. I'm not sure which draft archetype this is going to be in, but obviously, you know, some of it is red here. This is cool for limited. I'm not going to spend too much time on this card because it's just like, well, if you have a lot of oil counters, then you can deal direct damage. It obviously wants to be in a red aggro deck, or Gruul or something like that, where you have a lot of counters. So you need to be as wide as possible. So in a go wide aggro deck with a lot of good oil counter creatures, yeah, this will be good. If not, it won't. Next is Bladed Ambassador. This card I'm actually super excited about, but not in the format that you're thinking. It's 1 white, 1 generic for a 3/1 Phyrexian soldier. It enters the battlefield with an oil counter on it. You can tap 1 generic mana, remove an oil counter from it, and it gains indestructible till end of turn. I think this is going to be amazing in an aggro deck in draft in the limited format. I'm not sure if this is going to see standard play. It is a nice aggressive 2-drop. It has 3 power and it has the ability to make itself indestructible. So if you're up against, you know, another aggro deck and you're constantly in combat with little creatures, it kind of has like a Seasoned Hollowblade vibe to it, where you're not discarding a card to make it indestructible, but it does have that, where it kind of functions as its own removal spell when it wins combats. So I think this is like a mid to like actually pretty decent card for aggro decks, and it is a soldier. So mono white soldiers, Azorius soldiers is very good right now. So I'm going to experiment with this in the soldier build. I think it's pretty resilient and a pretty decent card. Next is Necrogen Rot Priest. 1 green, 1 black, 2 generic for a Phyrexian zombie cleric. It's a 1/5, so it has a really beefy toughness on it, but a low amount of power, but it has Toxic 2. And Toxic 2 is a new mechanic, sort of a take on Infect, that whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player gets the amount of poison counters behind the Toxic. So in this case, it'd be 2 poison counters. And it also states whenever a creature you control with Toxic deals combat damage to a player, that player gets an additional poison counter. And then it also has an activated ability of 1 green, 1 black, 1 generic. Target creature you control with Toxic gains Death Touch until end of turn. So this is obviously going in Toxic tribal to try to win by getting 10 poison counters on your opponent. Now, whether this card's good or not really depends on the other creatures, like all tribal things. It's like, well, if you have a good lord and a good set of other creatures, then yeah, it will be good. But on the face of it, if you can have a few toxic creatures get in early, get 2 or 3 poison counters, and then play this on turn 4 and then keep that pressure on, and this itself having Toxic 2 and being a really, really good blocker, and also having the ability to give Death Touch to your stuff, I think this is actually a pretty good card. And I'm excited to play with this in the Toxic Matters mechanic. If we got a lot of little good toxic creatures that deal poison counters, it might be very good. Next we have Cankerbloom, 1 green, 1 generic for a Phyrexian fungus. 3 power, 2 toughness. Pretty good for a 2-drop, but uncommon. It also has 3 sacrifice modes on it. Tap 1 generic mana, sacrifice it, destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or proliferate. And proliferate simply means that if there's counters on things, you add 1 counter of each type on every permanent. So this is really like versatile, right? This is your 2-drop. It can deal 3 damage if there's nothing on the field. It can block. It can possibly trade up with a more aggressive 4/3 or something like that. You can block and then sacrifice it, destroy a big artifact if your opponent cares about artifacts. If Selesnya Enchantments is giving you a hard time with Hallowed Haunting, you destroy an enchantment, or you just proliferate if you have a lot of counters on things or you're doing some toxic damage. I think this card is very versatile, and I think this card is actually quite good and uncommon. Here we have Blightbelly Rat. 1 black, 1 generic for a Phyrexian Rat. It's 2/2 for 2. It has Toxic 1. We already went over that, so this is another little toxic creature. And when it dies, Proliferate. I think this card is quite powerful in that toxic deck. It's a 2-drop, gets in for 2 damage, gets a poison counter on your opponent whenever it dies. All of a sudden they get another poison counter, and that just might mean the difference between getting them from 9 poison counters to 10. It's a great uncommon little rat. Next we have Bonepicker Scourge. 1 black, 2 generic for a Phyrexian Imp. It's a 2/2 flyer and it has Corrupted. And Corrupted means as long as your opponent has 3 or more poison counters, it has Death Touch and it has Lifelink. I wish it had Toxic 1 on it so it would actually lend itself to the buildup of poison counters and not just care about having poison counters. If you have a toxic deck and you have things that are trying to deal poison, you don't really care about doing 2 damage and gaining life and having Death Touch on a flyer. I don't think this card's very good. If it had Toxic 1 on it, we'd be talking. Maybe it would go in that deck. I'm just not impressed with Bonepicker Scourge. Okay, we're starting to get into the commons now. We're getting into draft chaff here. This is 1 green for a Rustvine Cultivator. You can tap it to put an oil counter on it. It's a 1/2. You can tap it to remove an oil counter and then untap target land. Not a fan of a mana dork that you have to tap to gain oil counters and then untap to remove the counters, so it has limited use and it's super slow. Not impressed with this. Don't really see where it's going to see standard play at all. Next is Mirror Convert. 2 generic mana for 2/1 artifact creature Phyrexian Mirror. It has Toxic 1. You can tap it, pay 2 life, and add 1 mana of any color. It's pretty decent. It can get in. It can deal toxic, poison damage. It can trade with something. Or it can actually accelerate you. I'm not sure if that deck really needs acceleration, so it's weird to have Toxic on like a mana dork. Generally, you'd want that with Ramp. I haven't seen anything that leads me to believe that the Toxic deck wants Ramp, but here we are. I think it's fine. Next is Furnace Punisher. 1 red, 2 generic for an uncommon Phyrexian warrior. It's a 3/3 menace, pretty decent for 3. And at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Furnace Punisher deals 2 damage to that player unless they control 2 or more basic lands. This is your red sideboard card. You put this in whenever you're playing a deck that has no basics in it, and you're like, well, I'll just play this 3/3 menace. I'll get in for 3 damage, and then every turn you'll take 2 damage unless you deal with this thing. Sideboard's pretty cool, though, for a control deck with just all triomes. You're like, I'm going to punish you for those triomes. That's what Furnace Punisher does. Next is Sinew Dancer with some crazy art there. 1 white for a 1/1 Phyrexian Soldier. 4 mana, 1 white, 3 generic to tap it, tap target creature, and also has Corrupted. As long as they have 3 or more poison counters, it only costs 1 white and tap it to tap down a creature. Not strong enough. Could be good in draft. Who knows? Sometimes these little 1/1s that can actually tap down a creature every turn can make impact in limited formats, but this is not going to see plain standard. Here's a card I'm actually pretty excited about. Sawblade Scamp. 1 red mana for a Phyrexian Beast. It's a 1/1 haste, so it's your artifact Phyrexian Raging Goblin. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Sawblade Scamp, and then you can tap it, remove an oil counter from it, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this is cool. This goes in your mono red burn decks, right? You play this on turn 1 along with Monastery Swiftspear in your deck. You start attacking in. Before you know it, your opponent's at like 10 or 11 life. This has 3 oil counters on it. And then even if they kind of put up a wall against you and they finally try to stabilize their board, every turn you just tap your Sawblade Scamp and you can start pinging them for damage. I think this card's actually going to be pretty good. It's a common, and it might be a good contender in a lightning fast mono red burn deck. Next is Thrumming Bird. Look at that cute little bird if it wasn't Phyrexianized. It's 1 blue, 1 generic for a 1/1 bird horror. It's a flyer. When it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. If you've got a lot of toxic counters on something, you got some planewalkers in the field, you can proliferate, put some counters there. Yeah, it seems okay. I mean, it seems like it's very narrow, right? Proliferate. If you don't have anything to proliferate, it's going to suck. If you have a lot of stuff to proliferate, it's going to be good. Very highly dependent on other cards. Next is Quicksilver Fisher, 2 blue, 3 generic for a Phyrexian Drake. It's a 4/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. Gonna be good in limited, don't have much to say about it, not for standard. Next is another rare, Jor Kadeen First Gold Warden, 1 white, 1 red for human rebel legendary creature. It's a 2/2 trample. Whenever Jor Kadeen First Gold Warden attacks, it gets +X until end of turn, where X is a number of equipped creatures you control. Then, if Jor Kadeen's power is 4 or greater, draw a card. No good equipments in standard right now. It's a 2-drop 2/2. First of all, it doesn't even get +X based on the number of equipments that you control. It's very unlikely that you'll see Jor Kadeen ever get to 4 power based on the amount of equipments that are on creatures, because you have to pay the equip costs. I think this card's trash, basically. I don't think it's going to do anything in standard. This may be for like Commander or something. And we're right back home at Koth. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that thumbs up. It's free. It supports the channel. I really appreciate it. We're at 2,700 subscribers, and I can't thank you enough. Thanks for subscribing, and I will see you next time.